Let's start off with a simple select statement like this one that shows all fields from the grant table. We get 4 fields and 10 records. Now we can change our field select list to select any fields we want. Let's choose grant name and let's choose amount. Run it. And we get just those 2 fields, but we still get 10 records. Let's change this so we get just the EMP ID. We still get 10 records, even though one of them is null. Now, let's look at these records. We get employee 7, employee 2, employee 7, null, employee 4. Now, what if we wanted to see each individual value? How many different values are there? In other words, we should see 7 only once, 2 only once, 10 only once. So every value that appears 1 or more times, we want to see it only once. Well, there's 2 ways to do that. We can go distinct and then EMP ID. And we see null, 2, 3, 4, 5, and notice 7 appears only once. Or we have another alternative. We can use group by EMP ID. And again, we get every value once. Let's take this group by query and turn it back into a normal query for just a second. And notice we get all 10 results from our table. Let's pull in another field, amount, and run both of those fields. Now we see that even though employee 7 appears several times, he has a different value each time. What is employee 7's total? Whatever 4750 plus 18,100 plus 25,000 is. Well, here's a great usefulness for the group by. If you still wanted to see each employee listed only once, you group on the EMP ID. And what we want to see for the amount next to them, which one of those numbers should it choose? Well, perhaps we should aggregate them with a sum. What is the total for each employee's amount? Run this query, and employee 7 has $47,850. The total for each employee is listed right next to the employee ID. The employee ID is listed only once because we grouped on it, and then the numeric amount of amount was aggregated with the sum function. Let's change this just a little bit. Let's say we wanted to figure out how many grants each employee found, not the total amount. Well, we would just change our aggregated function from sum to count. And we can see employee 7 has found 3 grants. Now, what if I wanted to find the largest grant that each employee has found? You change your aggregated function from count to max. That finds the maximum amount in that grouping. And the highest grant that employee 7 has found is $25,000. All of our queries throughout this book have set a great precedence in making sure that every field in the result set is named. Now, this summarized query, where we're getting grand totals next to the name, appears to have no column name, so we could just easily alias this as total amount. And run it. And then we get the field name. Let's do a group by query with a join. Let's start off with select star from employee, and let's alias that as EMP. And then let's say inner join location, and we'll alias that as loc on emp.location ID equals loc.location ID, and run it. We get 12 records instead of all 13 employees because John Marshbank has a null location ID. Now, let's change this to a full outer join and run it. Now I get a total of 14 records. Okay, let's itemize our field list to just show city and first name. and run this. There's the city and Alex, there's Seattle Barry, Boston Lee, and so forth. Now, let's group by the city because we're interested in seeing the total of how many employees work in each city. So let's type group by city. Now, we're aggregating on city. Are we trying to sum, count, or find the maximum? What are we trying to do for the first name? We're trying to count all of the first names in that city. Notice in the city of Knoll, there's one person, and in Boston we have 3, Chicago we have none, Seattle we have 7, and in Spokane we have 2. When it comes to using count, we actually have a couple of choices. Now, before showing you those choices, let's turn this back into a normal, non-aggregated query by just selecting the city and first name fields, and run this query. Now let's look at all of our results if we can. Seattle is listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Each time, there's a name next to it. Spokane is listed twice. Now notice Chicago is listed once. So there is one record of Chicago in this query. It just doesn't have anybody in it. So if I were to count the number of first names in Chicago, even though it appears once in this query, it would be aggregated to 0. Let's see that again. Let's put a count next to first name, and we're going to group by the city. And run this. Chicago has a 0 next to it. It couldn't count any first names in Chicago. Now, if I were to change this count function to a count asterisk, it is no longer counting the values. It is counting the number of times Chicago appears as a record in the result set. And Chicago now has a 1 next to it. So there's a difference between counting records and counting values. If you're counting values, specifically name the field you want to count. If you're just counting records, then you just put an asterisk inside the function. Okay, got another trick to show you before turning you loose, and that's this. Let's do a join between the employee table as emp and join it to the grant table, and we'll alias that as gr. And this will be on the emp.empid field equals the gr.empid field. And we see the list of all the employees and the grants that they have found. Let's take a quick look here. It looks like David Lonning found another one. David Kenson has found 1. So we have 3 grants found by David Lonning, 1 grant found by David Kenson. Now, if we were to do a group by first name and put first name up in the field select list, followed by a count of the grant name, and run this, we get 4 next to David. It shows that David has found 4. What it did is it grouped the 3 records from David Lonning and the 1 record from Dave Kenson. So in this situation, we might want to do a multiple level grouping. So in the group by, let me go first name, comma, last name, and put last name in the field select list as well, which gets us to another rule. All of the fields listed in the group by clause must also be listed in the select clause. Any field in your select list that is not mentioned in the group by must use an aggregated function. Now let's test these results. Now we see David Kenson has 1 and David Lonning has 3. Time for Lab 4.1, Skill Check 1. Query the employee table of JProCo to see how many people work for each manager ID. Select the manager ID and count the employee ID fields. Alias the expression field as empID count. When you're done, your result should resemble the figure you see here. Skill Check 2. Perform a grouping query of the customer table to get a count of how many consumer versus business customers you have. Alias the aggregated field as customer count. Group on the customer type field. When you're done, your results should resemble the figure you see here. Skill check 3. Get a list of all customers and how many invoice orders each customer has placed. You will need to join the customer and sales invoice tables. Alias the aggregated field as invoice ID count. If a customer has not yet ordered, then you should still see their name with a 0 next to it. Hint: this will require an outer join between customer and sales invoice. When you're done, your screen should resemble the figure you see here. Skill check 4. Make a slight modification to skill check 3 so that only customers who have placed at least one order appear in the query. Now here's a hint. You're going to have to change the type of join. Notice customer 5 has never ordered and does not appear in this result. When you're done, your query should resemble the figure you see here.